You know that feeling when you walk into a place that used to be, like, incredibly familiar? Maybe a childhood home or even just an old office. And something specific, something important is just gone, irrevocably.
Right.
And the first thing you notice isn't the room itself, it's the absence. It hits you first.
Oh, absolutely. It's this immediate, almost physical dissonance. And we usually think of that feeling, whether it's about losing a person or maybe a dream career falling apart or a relationship ending. We think it's purely emotional, right? Sadness, anger, despair. Those are the labels we use.
Yeah, the usual suspects.
But if you really look closely at the experience itself, especially that feeling of being stuck, that lingering ache, you start to see that the core issue might actually be perceptual. It's about how we're seeing things, or maybe how we're not seeing them.
Right, and that's really what we want to dive into today. We're exploring how the mind actually builds our reality using some powerful ideas from Gestalt thinking. We want to understand what happens when the very structure, the map you use to navigate your life, suddenly gets shattered by loss. We're trying to move beyond just the stages of grief, the emotional part, and look at this cognitive thing, this fixation that keeps us sort of anchored to what's gone.
Exactly. So we're framing this persistence, this sometimes agonizing feeling of being stuck, not as some kind of personal failure to cope.
Right, not like you're doing grief wrong.
Precisely. But more as a kind of cognitive loyalty, a pattern of perception that we're almost trapped in.
And that leads to this paradox we want to unpack, doesn't it? This idea that the deep, chronic pain we feel isn't always just about the memory of the person or the thing itself.
Yeah.
But it's rooted in the structure of our own attention, how our perception just refuses to let go of the shape, the figure of what's missing.
It really is like a phantom limb phenomenon, but for our whole reality. A piece of your mental map that just won't update its coordinates even though the landscape has fundamentally changed.
Wow.
And understanding this structure, this relationship between what we focus on, the figure and everything else, the ground, that's the key. That's the leverage point. It's how we might move from being completely trapped inside the outline of what's missing,
Living in that empty space.
to actually re-entering the flow of life, the present moment.
Okay, let's definitely unpack this. Where do we start?
Well, I think to really get the power of absence, we first need to appreciate the miracle of presence. How we perceive things normally, our sanity, our ability to function, it relies on this fundamental perceptual thing, the figure-ground relationship.
Right, the idea that we focus on one thing and the rest fades back.
Exactly. The mind isn't just passively receiving information like a camera. It's intensely active. It's like a sculptor, constantly organizing the chaos of sensory input, all the lights, the sounds, the feelings, into meaningful structures we can actually navigate.
Which is essential, otherwise we'd just be completely overwhelmed, right? A constant barrage of equal stimuli.
Total chaos. A flat, meaningless mess. So the mind selects a figure. That's the thing you focus on, the element that seems to pop out that demands your attention. And everything else, it gets relegated to the ground. The blurry background context that you're mostly ignoring.
Like focusing on your voice right now and not really noticing the hum of the computer
or the feeling of the chair you're sitting on, or the temperature of the room. It's happening all the time. Recognizing a specific instrument in an orchestra, picking out one conversation in a noisy party. That's figure ground.
It's perception working efficiently, giving us focus. But
Yes.
you mentioned loss does something weird here, an inversion.
A brutal critical inversion,
Oh,
yes. When a really significant figure is removed, a person, a core relationship, maybe a daily routine that defines your life, even a part of your identity,
Yeah.
when it's physically, irreversibly gone, your mind doesn't just neatly update the map and say, okay, delete those coordinates.
You'd think it would. Like, okay, adapt. That person isn't here. Recalculate the social dynamic. But it doesn't work like that, does it? The system seems to glitch. Why doesn't it just let the figure go?
Well, it seems that perception, at its very core, just cannot tolerate a pure void. It needs a figure to orient itself, even if it has to generate that figure internally. Try this thought experiment. Close your eyes, picture a bright red apple. Easy,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, got it.
Okay, now try to imagine the pure absence of that apple. Not the space around it, not a white screen replacing it, but the sheer lack of the apple in your mind's eye.
That's hard. My mind keeps wanting to put, like, a hole there. Or just blackness where it was.
Exactly. It balks.
Yeah.
It can't do pure nothingness. It instantly substitutes something, a ghost image, an outline, a hole. It has to turn the nothing into some kind of something to maintain its own stability.
Wow, okay.
So, when loss happens, the mind doesn't just accept the void left by the person or the situation. It holds on to the shape of the figure, but it transforms it. It becomes a negative
The
space.
silhouette.
A silhouette carved out of the living world, yes. And the mind feels compelled, almost forced, to keep tracing that outline over and over. This is why the silence in a house where someone used to laugh doesn't just feel quiet. It feels like a specific kind of heavy silence. It's the sound of your expectation hitting nothing.
And the empty chair doesn't just blend into the background. It glares at you almost. That empty space is suddenly more vivid, more insistent than all the things that are still there.
That's the mechanism. That negative space becomes a kind of perceptual black hole. It hijacks your attention.
Why, though? Why does the absence become so powerful?
Because that absence carries the weight of memory, sure, but also the intense tension of something unresolved, something incomplete. And because it's so charged, everything else, your job, your friends, new possibilities, even just the sunshine outside, it all gets immediately demoted. It fades into this blurry, insignificant background.
The ground just loses its brightness because all the perceptual energy is being sucked into that one spot.
That's a great way to put it. All the light is being pulled into the gravity well of the missing figure. So you stop living primarily in the dynamic present world around you. Cognitively, perceptually, you start living inside that persistent, rigid outline of what's missing.
You mentioned the example of a grieving widow returning home.
Right. She sees the familiar things, his slippers by the door, his favorite mug on the counter, the indentation on his side of the bed. But her immediate overwhelming focus, the thing that triggers the breakdown, isn't those objects. It's the space between them. The hole where his voice should be echoing in the kitchen, where his hand should reach for the mug, where his weight should be on the mattress. That negative shape becomes the loudest thing in the room, brighter than the sun coming through the window.
So she's not really seeing the kitchen as a whole anymore. She's seeing the hole in the kitchen, and that hole just dominates everything.
That sounds incredibly draining, constantly having your attention pulled away like that. It is utterly exhausting. And crucially, this isn't necessarily a pathology. It's not wrong. We can think of it as perceptual loyalty. The mind is desperately trying to preserve the wholeness of the reality it knew. But the figure-ground relationship gets completely hijacked. The context of your ongoing life becomes muted, minimized, and the figure, the lost itself, becomes static, almost spectral, but incredibly dominant.
And that traps you in this loop, right? This perceptual loop.
Exactly. You're constantly returning to the coordinates of the loss mentally, trying to somehow force a conclusion or restore the balance that was broken, trying essentially to complete the gestalt, to make the pattern whole again.
And this is the really tough part.
Here's the cruel twist. You're trying to complete a living, dynamic pattern, your life, your sense of self, with an element that is now irreversibly gone. You simply cannot complete a gestalt with a ghost. The perceptual system is still screaming for closure, for that missing piece, but the piece isn't available.
So the loss doesn't just fade away gracefully over time, it gets etched into the very canvas of how you see things.
It becomes like a permanent overlay, a watermark. It's transparent maybe, but it's always there, underneath every new experience. You might be having a wonderful moment, maybe you see a beautiful tree, and instantly the watermark appears. He would have loved this tree. Or you hear a piece of music, and you feel the ghost of her presence beside you.
The figure hasn't stepped back into the ground, it's become this omnipresent transparency.
Yes, and this points to something really quite shocking that comes out of Gestalt thinking. The persistent suffering isn't solely because of how much you loved them or how important that thing was, though that's obviously huge. A significant part of the ongoing pain comes from the structure of your perception itself. It's become a deep perceptual habit, a cognitive rut that your mind keeps falling back into almost automatically.
That really drives home that optical illusion analogy, the vase and the two faces. If you're stuck seeing the vase, the shape of what's gone, you can't just decide to see the two faces, which represent the present reality, other people, new possibilities.
Your gaze is fixed. The structure is holding you there.
You're not actively choosing the pain, in a way. The fixation, the structure, is choosing for you.
Precisely. And until that structure somehow shifts, until that dominant figure of absence can dissolve or flip or integrate, you remain trapped in that outline.
So the path forward isn't just about healing the emotion necessarily, it's about achieving some kind of perceptual reorganization. That feels like a really different approach, but if the mind is so desperate for completion, what makes this loop so incredibly persistent? Why doesn't that figure just soften and dissolve eventually, even when logically we know it should? Why does it stick around?
That takes us deeper into the idea of the unfinished gestalt. It's about this almost neurological demand for resolution. which often seems way more powerful than just logical acceptance.
Okay, so we've established this idea that the pain is structural. It's a cognitive fixation on the absence. But why is it so sticky? Why does that fixation seem to resist our conscious will, our logic, even just the passage of time? Why does the loss keep showing up like this insistent presence almost, rather than just fading into a quiet memory?
Because our consciousness, fundamentally, organizes experience into these meaningful chunks, these units of meaning, the gestalts we mentioned. A relationship is a gestalt. A career path is a gestalt. Even a simple conversation is a mini gestalt.
They're like patterns we recognize.
Exactly. And these patterns aren't just static labels, they carry energy. They carry an implicit demand for perceptual completion. They want to be resolved. They seek closure.
Like a cliffhanger in a story. You desperately need to know what happens next.
Precisely that feeling. A question needs an answer. A melody needs its final resolving chord. A story needs its ending. Now, if that gestalt gets severely interrupted, a sudden death, an unexpected betrayal, a project collapsing right before the finish line, the perceptual field doesn't just note the interruption and move on. It fixates on the point of rupture. It maintains this high level of tension around the incompleteness.
So it keeps looping, replaying the moment.
Yes, it loops, it replays, it mentally screams, this pattern is not finished. This unit of meaning is incomplete.
That sounds less like emotional grief and more like a computer running a corrupted file over and over, consuming all the processing power.
That's a really good analogy. An unfinished gestalt doesn't just fade nicely into the background, into the ground. It becomes what we might call a standing wave in your perceptual field.
A standing wave? What do you mean?
It's like a persistent vibration, a dissonance that just never settles down. It's this constant underlying hum of unresolved tension. And that is the engine driving prolonged, stuck grief. The core issue isn't that the person is failing to move on, it's that their entire perceptual system is locked onto this intolerably incomplete pattern.
We see this outside of grief too, right? Isn't there that psychological effect? The Zeigarnik effect, where you remember unfinished tasks way better than finished ones?
Absolutely. Yeah. The Zeigarnik effect is a perfect demonstration of this perceptual priority in action. Incomplete figures, incomplete tasks, they just command attention because they represent unresolved energy in the system. Now, apply that principle to major loss. It becomes devastating. The loss doesn't recede just because it's painful. It maintains top priority in your mental landscape because it represents the most significant incomplete figure you have. It automatically hijacks the spotlight of your attention.
Okay, this is leading to that really uncomfortable truth we touched on earlier. If I actively try to push that figure away, if I try to force myself to move on by suppressing the thoughts or distracting myself constantly...
You're actually making the fixation worse.
Really? How?
Because suppression doesn't dissolve the figure, it freezes it.
Yeah.
You arrest its potential motion, but you don't release the underlying tension.
Yeah.
The figure becomes this rigid, immovable monument in your mind. It continues to demand attention precisely because that structural tension hasn't been resolved. You're not choosing the pain anymore. The unresolved form itself is demanding to be looked at.
Okay, let me push back a bit here, because a lot of standard grief counseling, and maybe just common sense advice, talks about acceptance. Moving through stages, eventually reaching acceptance. You know, they're gone, I accept it. Are you saying that logical acceptance, just knowing it intellectually, isn't enough if the perceptual structure is still stuck?
That is exactly the nuance I'm trying to highlight. Logic operates on one level, the cognitive level. Conscious acceptance might happen sort of above the waterline.
Yeah.
But the fixation, the standing wave, is happening deeper down to the perceptual habits, maybe even in the neurological pathways. You can know logically that they're gone, but your perceptual field might still be organizing itself as if they could walk through the door.
Wow.
The system at that deep level doesn't really care about your logical conclusion. It only cares about form. And if the form of that central gestalt is incomplete, it dominates your experience.
So the failure isn't emotional weakness, it's a failure of perceptual reorganization.
Correct. And we can even think about the quality of the pain through another gestalt idea, isomorphism.
Isomorphism, what's that?
It's the idea that our inner experience, like emotional tension, often have a corresponding structure or shape in our cognitive or perceptual field. The pain you feel isn't just random noise, it's often the exact perceptual echo of how the gestalt was broken.
So the way the loss happened affects the shape of the pain.
Think about it. A sudden traumatic loss, a car crash, a shocking diagnosis that's a violent, instantaneous interruption. It likely creates a very sharp, rigid, high-tension figure in your mind. We might call this a state of arrested motion. Imagine throwing a stone towards water. but catching it midair just before it hits. The ripples never form, but all the potential energy for those ripples is still there, suspended. The system is paused in shock.
Okay, I can feel that tension. Whereas
Yeah.
maybe a long, slow loss, like a chronic illness that goes on for years, or watching a dream slowly fade away, that might create a different shape.
Precisely. That might result in a figure that's more blurred, maybe ambiguous, harder to define. It could lead to a more lingering, low-grade ache or confusion, rather than that acute, sharp agony. But in both cases, the underlying mechanism is the same. The perceptual system is still striving for completion, it's still demanding that missing piece, that resolution, that final chord.
So if we can't provide the missing piece, if we can't actually complete the gestalt externally, the goal has to shift. It sounds like the work isn't about trying harder to fix it, but maybe
Yeah.
stopping the effort to complete it and instead just witnessing the structure as it is, internally.
Yes. That's the crucial shift in practice. Stop focusing solely on the symptom, the grief, the sadness, and start addressing the engine, the unfinished structure itself. Instead of fighting the feeling, you gently turn your attention to the form of the feeling. You ask, where exactly is the rupture in this pattern? What note feels like it was never played? What is the actual shape of this absence I'm feeling? Is it sharp, hollow, heavy, crushing? And the key is, just see it. Acknowledge its form without that immediate impulse to fix it, change it, or make it go away.
This feels like where real insight could happen. It's not just understanding why you're stuck, but actually perceiving how your whole way of seeing the world has been organized around this gap.
That's the power of the Gestalt perspective. Remember the example of the man haunted by that unfinished conversation with his father who died suddenly?
Yeah.
He wasn't just grieving the loss of his father as a person, he was trapped by the unfinished interaction. The unresolved energy of the sentence his father never got to finish, the response he never got to give.
His mind was just stuck in that loop, right? Playing out different endings, wanting to shout the missing words. That specific gestalt, that conversation was still active and draining him.
Exactly. And the shift, the reorganization, didn't happen through more effort or more logical acceptance. It happened when he performed a very simple, quiet act of awareness. He stopped directing the energy outward towards the ghost of his father, trying to get something impossible. And instead, he directed his attention inward towards the structure of the rupture itself. He sat quietly, and in his mind, he spoke the words he needed to say, not to his father, but to the form of the interaction itself. Something like, I see you, I see this unfinished sentence you didn't get to finish. I know what was left unsaid, and I am acknowledging the shape of that incompleteness right now.
So by naming the shape, by acknowledging the form of the abscess, he brought the energy back into the present field.
He essentially completed the gestalt in awareness. The external piece, his father's actual reply, was still missing, obviously, but the internal tension held within that incomplete structure could finally resolve. And when that happened, the figure softened. It stopped being this dominating prison. It became more like an artifact. A memory with shape, but without the paralyzing charge. The pain didn't vanish, but its priority, its demand on his attention, lessened dramatically.
Wow, so the secret isn't trying to fill the hole. It's about honoring its shape, allowing that unfinished form to just exist and be witnessed, without judgment. And somehow, that simple act of acknowledgement allows the whole perceptual field to start reorganizing itself naturally. Which brings us to, well, what happens next? Integration. So after all this struggle with the dominant figure, the standing wave, there's often this moment, right? Maybe not dramatic, but quiet. You realize, one day, that the figure isn't grabbing you in the same way. It's gone. Not that you've forgotten the person or the event, but its power as a magnet for your attention has faded. You notice the chair is just a chair again. Or that anniversary date rolls around and you remember it, maybe feel a pang, but it doesn't carry that same physical, demanding weight anymore.
It often feels like taking a full breath for the first time in months or even years.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but profound. That moment signifies the end of the figure's dominance. It's a major perceptual event because the structure has finally shifted towards integration.
So that huge monolith of loss, the figure that defined everything, it hasn't been, like, surgically removed or destroyed.
No, not destroyed. It's been absorbed. It dissolves back into the background, into the ground, becoming part of the texture of your life. It's integration, not erasure. And here's a key secret, I think. The figure disappears from its dominant position, not because we fought it hard enough or managed to forget it, but because the perceptual field no longer needs it to orient itself.
Meaning?
Its incompleteness has been fully witnessed, fully acknowledged in awareness, like in the example with the father, and once that tension is released, it loses its desperate urgency. The energy that was trapped in that standing wave of non-closure finally gets released back into the whole system.
That makes me think of the night sky analogy again. For so long, maybe you could only see that one incredibly bright star, the loss. It burned so intensely it blotted out everything else. You mapped your whole world by its painful light, and then maybe gradually, maybe suddenly one night, your gaze just widens. You see the whole sky. The star is still there, definitely. But now it's just one point of light among countless others. It's part of the constellation, part of the ground. You see the whole field again.
That's a beautiful way to describe transfiguration. The figure of the lost doesn't die. It transforms its function within your perception. It shifts from being the heavy anchor holding you fast to the specific coordinates of past pain.
To maybe becoming more like a compass, something that informs your direction now based on what you learned.
Exactly. Or it moves from being an open wound to being more like a healed scar, where that watermark we talked about, it integrates into your mental landscape, it finds its place and can finally rest peacefully within the larger field.
And what's really fascinating, almost philosophically, is the idea that emerges here. The loss itself, the thing that caused so much pain, wasn't actually the enemy of meaning in your life.
In a strange way, it was the necessary condition for a new kind of meaning. It acted as its midwife.
Yeah.
The deepest meaning doesn't seem to live in clinging to what was lost, the years you didn't get, the future you planned. It emerges in the rupture itself, in the gap, in that negative space that your perception was forced to carve out and eventually learn how to hold without collapsing. The loss was the catalyst that forced your whole perceptual system into a radical reorganization, compelling you to build a new, perhaps deeper internal map.
That really pushes back against the societal pressure to just get over it or move on quickly. If the goal was just to get back to how things were, we'd be trying to patch the old map. But maybe the point was to become the field that could actually contain the loss, to learn how to navigate with that absence, to see in the dark in a way, to understand the contours of what's missing without being defined solely by it.
And we can even track this structurally, thinking about that isomorphism again. Before the loss, maybe your perceptual field was organized primarily around presence and expectations of continuity.
Right, life felt whole, predictable maybe.
During the fixation phase, it becomes rigidly organized around absence and the tension of incompletion.
Everything is seen through that lens of loss.
But after integration, the field reorganizes itself around something new. Maybe we can call it aliveness. But it's a different kind of aliveness. It's deeper, more resilient.
And that aliveness isn't just simple happiness, is it? It feels like an aliveness because of the loss, not in spite of it.
Precisely. Because you faced that structural demand of absence, you survived the reorganization, you understand something fundamental about the cost and the preciousness of existence, you've learned to hold the shape of nothingness and return with a fundamentally new perceptual capacity.
So the integration feels like a disappearance.
Yes, but not the disappearance of the memory itself. It's the disappearance of the figure's insistent screen for attention. That figure is now a quiet, integrated part of the ground, part of the foundation supporting everything new that grows.
And it's only in that newfound peace, that quiet ground, that new figures can finally start to emerge naturally, right?
Exactly. New interests, new projects, maybe quieter joys, deeper connections with the people who are still here, maybe truths about yourself you were too consumed by the loss to see before. And crucially, these new figures don't arrive to replace what was lost. That's impossible. They emerge from the soil that the loss, once integrated, has actually enriched. They rise in relationship to that now integrated structure.
So the figure truly disappears from dominance, not when you force yourself to stop seeing it.
But when you naturally start seeing everything else again, when the ground becomes vibrant and interesting again, the ultimate skill learned is the ability to hold that negative space, to acknowledge the ghost without letting it extinguish all the other light. You stop viewing the world solely through the lens of absence, and you start seeing absence as just one quiet texture that actually gives depth and contrast and shape to the light that remains. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so we've traced this really profound journey. It's a path of radical perceptual reorganization, really. Moving from that initial figure fixation, where the shadow of loss becomes this overwhelming magnet for all our attention, through the struggle with the unfinished Gestalt, and finally arriving at this quiet revolution of integration where that figure dissolves back into the ground, actually enriching the whole field.
And the key takeaway, I think, is that we're not broken when we feel stuck in grief. We're undergoing a profound, often incredibly difficult, but ultimately necessary structural change in how we perceive reality itself.
So for everyone listening, maybe we can invite you to apply this lens to your own inner world. Look at your life, especially areas where you feel stuck or looping on a past hurt, and maybe ask yourself,
What is the structure of my most persistent, unfinished gestalt? Where exactly does the pattern feel broken or ruptured? What note feels like it's missing from the melody?
and then maybe the most powerful question.
What happens if you simply stop trying so hard to force yourself to play that missing note? What if you just witnessed the silence where it should be?
The field is open now. The shadow didn't vanish, it didn't get erased. It just became part of the quiet, deep contour of your own aliveness. The dominant figure has subsided, but maybe the perception of the whole field in all its complexity is only just beginning.
That pain, that structural tension, it often won't leave until you stop demanding that it leave, until you stop asking it to be anything other than what it is, the shape of an incomplete event in your life's pattern. Perhaps the invitation is to let it stay, in a way. Let it be witnessed simply as a form. Let it become part of the ground. Because it's from that ground, including the integrated shape of the loss, that a new figure, a new project, a new relationship, a new version of your life, a deepened capacity for just being present will eventually rise.
So the final thought to leave you with is, what fresh curiosity, what quiet joy, maybe what authentic longing wants to emerge and become figure for you now? You are no longer solely defined by what you lost. You are the vast, complex field that has learned how to hold absence and somehow profoundly still finds ways to say yes to what remains and what might yet be.